Okay, everybody, welcome back. So in this section, we're going to start now the beginning of the mix of this song. So this is going to be broken up into several sections or several parts to try to give this to you in a more smaller, digestible, portion along to the mix. So we're going to take this mix right from the beginning, right to the end, and we're going to use everything that we learned in the first bunch of sections with all the different plugins and show you all these techniques and all these processes and concepts around how I use analog plugins, emulations in real world applications. So in this part here, we're just going to go through and I'm just going to show you kind of how I laid everything out, show you the routing of how everything is laid out, and just kind of give you the foundation of how I got this set up. Again, you have the audio files in your packet with this course, so go ahead and you can import this into your DAW of choice. I'm using, as always, PreSonus Studio One Professional version 3. But like I said earlier on in this section or in this series, it doesn't matter what DAW you're using. All these techniques and concepts will apply. Okay, so here is the song. It's the same song we've been working with all throughout this series. The song is by Jet B. The name of the track is Suit You. Okay, so what I've done is I've imported all the audio files into the DAW here. So the first thing, I just want to take you kind of through the setup. So obviously I've gone through and I've done all my fades. I've done all my my fade-ins and my fade-outs at the beginning of all the tracks to make sure we don't have any clicks and pops. Actually, I don't think I did it on the bass here. So let's, as I'm talking to you, I'll do this on the bass and the guitars here. So we're just going to go through and just kind of clean up the edit screen and just kind of get rid of all the places where there's no audio actually being heard here. And this just, for me, just kind of cleans up the audio a little bit. This distorted guitar is kind of an intro thing here, so I'm going to shrink this down. And as you can see here at the beginning, oops, this kind of starts off with an electric guitar, as I'm sure you've already heard if you've been if you've listened to this at all in your DAW. But I like to go through and just kind of clean up some of this stuff just to get the real estate looking nice, if you will. Just easier on the eyes, easier to look at when you don't have a bunch of dead space here where there's no audio, especially on things like background vocals and lead vocal double tracks and those kinds of things. So I've gone through and I've done all my fade-ins. On the background vocal tracks, you can see I cut out all the dead space between all of the background vocals, again, just to kind of make it easier to see. Usually I'll go through and, do something like this and just kind of clean them up. Makes it real quick and easy, but just make sure when you do that, then you also go through and make sure you put your fade-ins and your fade-outs at the beginning of your audio events or regions if you're working in Pro Tools. Again, that'll just make sure you don't get any clicks and pops with the playhead crossing the audio, which can happen sometimes. I did not do this on the lead vocal track itself, and again, you could, you don't have to. The real thing you're looking for is if you zoom in on the audio here all the way, you can see this is already done at the recording stage. There's no headphone bleed or anything like that, and that's the thing I'm really concerned about the most. If it was tracked where maybe the lead vocal or any of the tracks had a bunch of headphone bleed or stuff, I may want to get rid of that. Here I don't have it. So you can choose to do it or not do it on the lead vocals. I'm just going to kind of leave that alone on the lead vocal double. Same thing on the piano tracks, the electric guitar track, guitar 3, where there's, I believe is a guitar solo. So that might be another area where we have a lot of dead space. We could clean some of this up. And again, whether you choose to do this or not really has no bearing as far as the this series is concerned, mixing with the plugins. I'm just kind of showing you what I do, what I typically do, just as a point of reference. Whether you do that or not is completely up to you. You don't have to. Like I said, you don't have to do this thing. So, but most of this is now done if you look through all the tracks. Now, again, here on the tom tracks for the drums, I will mostly always cut out all the dead space between the toms if this was not software drums where there's here there's no bleed, as I just mentioned. With a live acoustic drums, you're always going to have mic bleed from the other mics on the drum kit, right? So I will normally always cut that out and just leave the tom hits. But because we don't have that problem, I'm just going to leave it alone to save time. And people may ask, well, why do you want to do that when there is bleed? is because when you start doing things like compressing an EQ, I don't want to hear that bleed coming through the rest of the mix. It kind of muddies up the mix. Some engineers will tell you they like to leave it in there because it gives it more of a live feel. I don't subscribe to that. And other people will say, well, just put a gate on it. And you can use gates. I don't like the way gates sound. I just like to clean them up. Okay. So once I have everything kind of cleaned up here, and that's what I've done, just so you know, I've cleaned up most of it, but not all of it. And everything is kind of laid out the same way as it was in the prior section. So we have all our drums down here in brown. We have our bass next over here in blue, our 3 electric guitars in green. We have our piano track in this red pinkish color. We have our 2 lead vocals in the bright yellow, and then all our background vocals are in a different kind of shady yellow. I'll even make those a little bit different just so we can really distinguish the difference. Orange. Down here I have a busing system: drum bus, bass bus, guitar bus, piano bus, lead vocal bus, and background vocal bus. And then I have my standard set of effects here, about 5-6 tracks here. We have a delay that I'm going to use on vocals, I'm sure, a small room, a plate verb, and a hall reverb, and then I have an instrument room, which I'll show you what plugins we'll be using in a bit. And then lastly, down here in purple, all our parallel compression tracks. Okay, so everything is being routed to the buses, and then the buses are being routed out to the mains, and that's and all our effects are being routed to the buses as well. Okay, save. So now let's just walk through our basic layout. So as I was talking about through the last sections, if you've been following along and watching in order as I suggested, you'll know that we've kind of set up our basic foundation for our analog studio, right? So we talked about the 3 plugins that we use, or that I use on every single mix to start off the foundation, which is the tape machine, right? Some kind of console emulation, and then my channel strip. And then from there, as we get into the mix, we use all those other plugins and we sprinkle them around, if you remember the last section. And that's what I kind of have here in front of you. So let me just take you through the layout of what we have so far, just so you, if you forget what we did. So on our master bus here, okay, the first plugin I'm using is the Virtual Console Collection, and I'm using the Brit 4KE because we're going to do an SSL mix on this particular song. Okay, so that's the first plugin. Our second plugin here is another instance of the Slate Virtual Mix Rack that I'm just kind of leaving open here because I might use some EQ later on in the mix. I might use some saturation plugins like the Virtual Tube Collection that Slate has, or Revival. There might be some other things I want to do to kind of enhance the sound as we get through and towards the end of the mix. So I'll always leave like one of these virtual mix racks kind of open with nothing in it, okay, just so it's there for me to move. On the master bus for compression, we're going to use the Waves SSL compressor because we're doing the SSL mix, and we're going to use this one this time around. And then from there, last but not least, we're going over to the Slate Virtual Tape Machine. Now on the master bus, we're using the half-inch 2-track mode, right? We're going to do it on 15 IPS, okay, to kind of get a little more compression, and we're just going to stay on the FG9 tape for now. So that's our master bus. Okay, if we go through our normal buses here, okay, with our drum bus, bass bus, guitar bus, piano, and vocal buses, the first plugin we're using across most of our tracks. We're using the PreSonus Mix Tool, and I'll explain why in a second. We're not using it for anything. Honestly, the only reason why I'm using it is so I can use the first slot, insert slot, here, and let me show you why. So you may say, well, why are you doing that if you're not really using it? And you can see I'm using the mix tool across some of these other tracks as well, because when we get down to the drum tracks, you'll see that the first plugin that we use in the inserts is the Auto Align by Sound Radix, a phase correction tool, which I'm going to show you how to use in a bit as we get to the drum section. All the drums, with the exception of the room mic, all of these drums have Auto Align as the first plugin. You can see that here. Okay, so the reason why I put the mix tool, even though I'm not using it, I'm putting the mix tool because it's very low CPU usage. It's just a utility plugin as the first insert all the way across, is because that will take up the spot, the first slot where Auto Align takes up with the drums. Because the second plugin across all the tracks is the Virtual Tape Machine, right? So in order for me to have it line up, so the tape machine is always in the second slot across all the tracks. So if I want to highlight the entire mix, which we'll do later on like this, and I just want to turn off all the tape machines, as you can see I do here, you have to make sure that all the tape machines are the second plugin in the insert chain. If auto align is the first plugin in the drums, and then second is the tape machine, but on the rest of the tracks, because we're not using auto align, it's the tape machine is the first plugin. You won't be able to turn off all the tape machines at once. Make sense? If it doesn't, let me explain here. So if I were to delete the mix tool on the bass track for a second, and now the tape machine is the first plugin, okay? Now if I highlight all these tracks up to the bass and I want to turn off just the tape machines, watch what happens. It's not turning off the tape machine. Why? Because it's turning off everything in the second slot, which happens to be on the bass track now, the virtual console collection, okay? So that's why I put a copy of the mix tool. Again, it's just set to Unity. There's nothing happening with it because I want to be able to turn the virtual tape machine. This is wrong. Let me just remove this one for a second. There we go. I want to be able to turn the virtual tape machine off evenly across all the tracks. Does that make sense? I hope I explained that clearly. You're probably going, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. But it does. Oh, I actually have to, I inadvertently here put the mix tool across all the drums now, and I want to eliminate that. Okay. So auto align is our first plugin in the insert chain up until the bass track, or up until the room, excuse me. And then from the room, I have to put a mix tool on the room. Okay. So now the virtual tape machine is the second plugin in the chain. The third plugin is my VCC, or my console emulation. And the fourth plugin is going to be my channel strip, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. So that's why I put the mix tool on all the tracks. So let's just make sure we turn on all the tape machines. Okay. Okay, hopefully that made sense. Okay, so now let's take a look at our bus again, now that I've said that. So again, the mix tool is the first plugin. The second plugin in the chain is going to be the virtual tape machine. And again, on the buses, we're using, on all the buses, we're using the 16-track multi-track, and we're using 30 IPS per second here across all of the buses. Okay, the third plugin in the chain on the drum bus, or on the buses, again, is going to be the VCC, and we're using the Brit 4KE. We're using the virtual mix bus part of the plugin because it is a bus. Okay, and you can see that all the way across all of the tracks. So here is here's the kick drum tape machine. Then we got the virtual console on the virtual channel on the Brit 4KE. Okay, from there we're going to our channel strip, which in this case we're going to use the Universal Audio Slate. Universal Audio SSL 4000E channel strip. Okay, because that's what we're using on as far as console emulation. So we're using the channel strip, and as you can see, that channel strip is across all of our tracks, and it is now the fourth plugin in the chain, all the way across the mix. Okay, nothing's set up. We're going to mix each track together. This is just my standard template. So once again, if I just wanted to turn off the channel strip along the way, I can click that one button and all of the SSLs go away. That's a great way to do an A/B comparison as you're listening to things. Okay, so that's why we're doing that. So that is kind of our routing as far as our basic set of plugins, our three foundation plugins: the tape machine, the console, and the channel strip. Okay, over here we have our standard set, or my template standard set of effects that I'm going to be using. Typically in most mixes, I can eliminate some or add some as we go along, but this is a good starting point. You can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tracks, 5 effects tracks. The first 4 are typically reserved for my vocals. I have a delay, then a small room reverb, a plate reverb, and a hall reverb. For the delay, I'm going to be using Soundtoys Echo Boy. We talked about that in an earlier section. I really love this on lead vocals, and we'll show you more in depth how I use that when we get to it. For the small room, I'm going to go ahead with the Slate Reverb's Reverb or Verb Suite Classics. I love this, and we're just setting it to a nice, natural vocal room, a small room, to give it a little bit of space. From the plate reverb, we're going to be using the Universal Audio Pure Plate. We took a look at this in one of the earlier sections as well. And then the hall reverb, we're going to use a new one, a Universal Audio plugin, the Lexicon 224. This is a great plugin. Love this plugin by Universal Audio. We're using a vocal hall preset that we'll tweak. For our instrument room or our instrument, reverb, I call it instrument room, or you could call it a reverb, but we're going to use the Ocean Way Studios. We took a look at this, the last section as well. This is a great plugin where I'm going to probably, well, this is typically what I'm going to do on a track like this. I'm going to put all of the instrumentation in this Ocean Way space. So it sounds like it has some continuity, like it was all recorded in Ocean Way Studios. We'll put the drums there. We'll put the guitar there. We may even put the bass there a little bit. And then we're going to put the vocals. We may even put the vocals there in addition to some of the reverbs. We'll have to see how it sounds as we go through. So that is and then we have our parallel tracks down here in purple, which we'll use at the very end. And again, starting off with the tape machine and then moving over to the virtual console collection, again, the mix bus portion on the Brit 4KE. So basically what I'm trying to say to you guys here is that this right here, I already have saved as a template. Okay, and we'll talk about, I've done mixed template videos on my YouTube channel. You can check those out. This is my standard template for this kind of music, indie rock, pop rock kind of a thing, hard rock, metal, where the only thing that will really change is probably the channel strip from mix to mix. But other than that, the tape machine, the console collection, auto align, my basic set of delays and reverbs that we just talked about, my parallel compression tracks, my busing system is always the same, and I'm always using a lot of the same plugins. So when you set this up, if you set this up as a template, before you even bring any audio into your session, the next time you have a mix, you can open up this template, import the audio tracks, and now you have a lot of this busy work kind of done. Putting all these plugins on and getting everything routed and such takes about 30 minutes, so it's all about speed. So if you're using Studio One, if you don't know how to save a template, once you get to this point, you could go ahead up to the Studio One, go to File, and go to Save as Template. And you can save it as a template. You can save a title, make it a title. You can describe it. You can give it a little icon. If you already have a template that, let's say you're modifying and you're updating your template, you can replace an existing template just by clicking on this, and you can see all the templates that I have. This happens to be my mixing template 2017. Okay, we're just going to cancel that. That's how you do it. And I'm not always, but fairly frequently throughout the course of time, I'll tweak my template a little bit if I bring in new plugins or buy new plugins, or may just have a different way of doing things. I'm always trying out new concepts, new techniques. Again, I'm always investing in my craft and learning, and I might find different ways to do things that I might try, and I'll update my template. Okay, so this is how we're going to start. So basically, we have everything routed. We have our foundation set of plugins. We chose our channel strip, which is the SSL. We put our reverbs and delays in. Everything's bussed the way it's supposed to be bussed, the way we like to have it bussed. And we also gone ahead and we cleaned up all our audio. We color coded everything. We did our fade ins and fade outs. We chopped out some of the dead space that we didn't need to make it a little easier on the eyes. And I think that's it. So that's what we've done. So now I'll come back for the next section. The next section, we're going to talk about drums. We're going to work with the drum kit in that only the drum kit in that next section. Going to go through auto align, how I use that. And then we're going to start getting things gain stage and getting things kind of set up. So we'll come back for the next section.